Genre: realistic fiction. The Friend Who Changed My Life by Pam Munoz Ryan. Illustrated by Carl Pierce. Essential question: what actions can we take to get along with others? Read about how one girl's confrontation with a bully changes her life. I hated being the new kid at school. I was in the fifth grade and my family had moved to a new neighborhood. Already with a size 9 shoe, my feet were an awkward atrocity. My curly brown hair, the result of the religious use of pink rubber curlers, stayed wholesomely off my face with hair clips. How was I to know that straight ponytails and short blunt bangs were the rage at this school? Since I hadn't yet adopted the no socks look, my sense of style didn't mesh either. I wanted to fit in, but I didn't have the all-necessary confidence. To escape, I walked around with my nose in a book. Unfortunately, I wore my vulnerability like a brand new pair of milk-white sneakers, all too ready to be scuffed. A bully took advantage. Her name was Teresa. She was tiny, wiry, and loud, with blonde bangs and the mandatory tightly pulled back ponytail. I swore she walked with a deliberate swagger just to get her ponytail to swing back and forth. For a reason unknown to me, she decided that I was worthy of her undivided attention, and every day she waltzed up to me and kicked me in the shins or the back of the legs. I could expect a wallop any time I was off guard, while I was standing in line to go to class after a recess, on my way out of the girls' bathroom, or as I pushed my lunch tray along the counter in front of the cafeteria ladies. Bam! Teresa was smart and quick. No teacher ever saw her, and my legs were black, blue, purple, and green within a week. My mom noticed the marks, but I pacified her by saying that I played on the jungle gym at recess and had bruised them on the bars. I could tell from my mom's expression that she was suspicious of my story. She made me promise I'd play somewhere else. I knew that if I kept coming home with mottled legs, one of my parents would eventually go to my teacher. I could only imagine the price I'd have to pay among the other kids if I was seen as both the new kid and a crybaby tattletale. I used to lie in bed every night dreading school and trying to figure out complicated routes to walk from one place to another so Teresa couldn't get to me easily. I had a convoluted method of getting to my classroom, which involved walking outside the fenced schoolyard and entering the grounds at the opposite end of the campus, then working my way through the kindergarten playground. At recess and lunch, I stayed in the open spaces on the grassy field, because if I saw Teresa coming, I could at least run. One day, Teresa chased me on the playground, about to close in with yet another successful attack. Frantically, I ran away from her, glancing back every few seconds to see where she was. I looked to one side and was relieved when I didn't see her. Thinking she had given up, I stopped abruptly and turned around, unaware that Teresa had been running full speed toward me from the other side. She didn't expect my sudden stop and collided into me and bounced toward the ground. A group of kids standing nearby laughed. Angry, Teresa got up and began kicking me with a fury over and over. A scrape on my knee reopened and blood trickled down my leg. As much as I wanted to, I didn't cry. I just stood there and took it. Mary Lou, also in the fifth grade, was the tallest and biggest girl in the entire school, including the sixth graders. She wasn't fat, but was sturdy and big-boned and strong. Her red hair, thousands of freckles, and fair skin gave her a gentle giant appearance. Still, no one ever messed with her. When Mary Lou shoved her way through the crowd of kids and took my elbow, everyone backed away, including Teresa. Mary Lou ushered me to the girls' bathroom. As I stood there shaking, she took a wad of paper towels, wet them, handed them to me, and pointed to my bloodied leg. "So, Teresa's been bothering you." I nodded, hoping that the next words out of Mary Lou's mouth would be, "Well, I'm going to take care of her for you." I had visions of having a personal hero to protect me, fantasies of Mary Lou escorting me around the school with a protective arm over my shoulder, clobbering anyone who came near me. Instead, Mary Lou said, "You can't let her keep doing this to you. She's never going to stop unless you make her stop. Get it?" I didn't really get it, but I nodded. "Listen, she's a pain. But if you don't stick up for yourself, things will get worse. You know that, don't you?" How could it get worse? I was already paralyzed with fear and had turned into a whipping post for some girl who was half my size. Besides, what did Mary Lou mean about sticking up for myself? Did she want me to fight Teresa? That idea terrified me more than being kicked every day. "I'm not kidding," said Mary Lou, "and if you don't do something, I'm going to start hitting you too, understand?" She made a fist and held it in front of my face. I thought about Mary Lou's size and weight and gulped. Things could definitely get worse. "Yes," I whispered. "Okay then, get back out there." Now? Did she mean stand up for myself right now? I walked back to the playground with Mary Lou smugly following behind. I couldn't see a way out of the situation. In front of me was Teresa, and in back of me was Mary Lou. The first bell rang, and kids began to assemble in their assigned lines on the blacktop in front of the classrooms. In a few minutes, the second bell would ring, and teachers would walk out and get their students for class. The yard duty teacher was out on the grassy field, blowing her whistle and rounding up the stragglers. As usual, no teachers would be around to witness my destruction. Teresa stood in a huddle of girls. Mary Lou nudged me toward her. I had never started a fight before in my life. I had never hit anyone and didn't have an inkling of what to do. My insides shook worse than my outsides. When Teresa saw me approaching, she set her mouth in a grim line, marched toward me, and swung her leg back to haul off and kick me. I jumped back to avoid the kick. I made a fist and flailed my arm wildly in some sort of ridiculous motion. Pop! In a miraculous blow, I caught Teresa in the nose and blood sprayed across her clothes. I don't know which of us was more surprised. I don't remember what happened next. I know we brawled on the blacktop. Gritty sand scraped the bare skin on my arms. I would notice the burns later. As we rolled over and over, tiny pebbles embedded in my face. One of them made a substantial puncture that didn't heal for weeks. The pock remained for years. I'm not sure who separated us and broke it up. In a matter of minutes, someone retrieved the yard duty teacher, and she corralled and ceremoniously walked us to the principal's office. I, the nice girl, the good girl, was going to the principal's office for fighting. Devastated, I hung my head. Sitting on the bench outside the principal's office and waiting to be called in, I worried about several things. Would the school tell my parents? What would my punishment be? What would Teresa do to get back at me? What would the other kids think? Branded, I was now a bad girl. The yard duty teacher deposited us in 2 chairs, side by side, in the principal's office and placed the referral slip on his desk. Our principal was a balding man with glasses and a kind, grandfatherly face. He seemed happy to see us. Smiling, he said, "Well, girls, I want you to put your heads together and decide what your punishment should be while I make a phone call." He picked up the phone, and as he made his call, I stared at his desk. I realized I could read the referral slip upside down. The yard duty teacher had written, "benched for 1 week." Teresa leaned toward me and whispered remorsefully, "I guess we should be benched for 2 weeks." She felt worse than I had suspected. I glared at her and shook my head no. The principal put down the phone. "Well, young ladies?" "We should be benched for a week," I blurted. "I agree, and I don't want to see you back here any time soon." He signed the referral and sent us back to class. "How did you know to say 1 week?" Teresa asked on our way back to class. "I could read what the yard duty teacher put on the slip, upside down," I told her. "Wow, you can read upside down?" Teresa said. her ponytail swinging like a pendulum. I didn't answer her. That night I told my mother that I fell, trying to jump rope double Dutch. Teresa and I were confined at every recess and lunchtime to the same green bench next to the stucco wall of the cafeteria building. It was indisputably the bad kids' bench. Kindergartners and first graders had to file by to get to their classrooms, and they always gave us a wide berth, their orderly lines snaking away from us, then back in formation, as if our badness might be contagious. The bench faced the playground, so the entire recess population could see who was not privileged enough to play. The yard duty teacher could keep an eye on us, too, in case we decided to jump up and sneak in a hopscotch game. Indignant and humiliated, I refused to talk to Teresa, who didn't seem to have any inhibitions about being chatty. She bragged to me about all sorts of things, but I was aloof until she said, "My mom takes me to the big downtown library every Tuesday after school." I rode my bike to the small branch library near my house every weekend, but my parents both worked full-time and couldn't always manage after-school activities or driving to the main branch. The big library had 100 times the selection of the branch library and a huge children's room with comfy pillows. They sometimes had puppet shows, story times, free bookmarks, and writing contests. Yep, every single Tuesday I go to the big downtown library to check out as many books as I like. Before I could pretend I didn't care, I said, "You're lucky." I was suddenly jealous of Teresa, but I didn't want her to know how much, so I returned to my determined martyrdom. Instead of listening to her, I stared at the dirt and ignored her prattle. The week was over soon enough. The principal never called my parents. The other kids didn't seem to care that I had been disciplined on the bad kids' bench. In fact, I actually detected a subtle reverence from some of my classmates. From then on, Teresa left me alone, and Mary Lou was my widely acknowledged ally. I didn't know how I'd ever repay her. A few weeks passed, and one of the girls in our class had a slumber party. All the fifth-grade girls were invited. The barrage of females descended on the birthday girl's house with sleeping bags, pillows, and overnight cases. Mary Lou and I set up our sleeping bags right next to each other. The night progressed happily until someone suggested we tell ghost stories. I hated ghost stories. I had far too active an imagination, which always took me much farther than the storytelling. I couldn't seem to turn off the dark, scary world. If I saw even a slightly scary movie on television, my stomach would churn for days, and I'd have to sleep with my bedside lamp on all night. Mary Lou must have felt the same, because she moved closer to me. We huddled together behind the avid listeners with our pillows almost covering our faces. There was no way not to listen. One girl told a particularly gruesome tale about a tree whose giant branches turned into fingers and could grab and capture children. Most of the girls squealed and clutched one another in mock terror before they ended up giggling. Already fraught with anxiety, I couldn't imagine how I would get through the night. I suddenly wanted to be in my own house, in my own bed, with my parents down the hall and my trusty bedside lamp. There didn't seem to be any way out of the situation that wasn't humiliating. At least Mary Lou was by my side. Suddenly Mary Lou started crying. "I'm scared," she said. "I want to go home." Mary Lou had read my mind, but had voiced it with her own tears. One of the girls said, "Don't be such a baby." Others chimed in, "Mary Lou's a scaredy cat." "I'm calling my parents," said Mary Lou through her giant sniffles. "The baby's calling her mommy and daddy," the girls chanted. I shivered in my sleeping bag, my stomach sick with fear. Sick that Mary Lou was leaving. Sick that I was next to a window with a tree looming on the other side. Mary Lou headed toward the phone and didn't seem to care about the taunting. She called her parents with her chin up, set down the phone, and methodically began packing up her things. My sleeping area looked bare without Mary Lou's sleeping bag and blanket. A tree branch brushed against the window from the wind. I was convinced it was the same tree from the story and that I would be its next victim. I stood up and began rolling up my sleeping bag. I'm going home too. Mary Lou, can your dad give me a ride? I heard more giggles. Then from across the room, a small voice said, Me too? Mary Lou nodded. I secretly celebrated. I knew that we'd suffer the consequences of the gossip and finger-pointing at school on Monday, but now I didn't care. There was safety in numbers. As I dragged my things into the hallway, I saw the third person. It was Teresa. The three of us huddled on the front porch waiting for Mary Lou's dad. In a final gesture of belittlement, one of the girls turned off the porch light, so we had to wait on the front steps in the dark, directly under the tree with the sprawling branches. On the other side of the door, the party howled with laughter. I was never so grateful to see station wagon headlights. Mary Lou's dad headed toward Teresa's house first. On the way, we were mostly quiet, but I felt happy. Happy I was going home to my own room. Happy that Mary Lou's tearful exit scene had been watered down by our group departure. I was puzzled, though, that Teresa had been frightened too. She always seemed so confident, so tough. In front of Teresa's house, she climbed out of the car and said, So do you guys want to go to the big library with me after school on Tuesdays? My mom drives me and she could drive you too. I would love to go to the big downtown library on Tuesdays after school, I thought. But with Teresa? My mind battled with my emotions. Teresa eagerly continued, My mom can call your moms to, make sure it's okay and everything. I hesitated. Are you going? I asked Mary Lou. I can't, she said, but you should go if you want to. Teresa sounded sincere enough. Mary Lou nudged me in the back seat as if to say, Go. I finally nodded. It was a strange camaraderie given our history. Teresa and I shared many trips to the library together on Tuesdays. I've often wondered if, in some convoluted way, Teresa's abuse had been an attempt to get my attention. She liked the library, and I always had my nose in a book, so she targeted me. Too bad for my legs that she didn't have better social skills. Mary Lou is still my hero. If a person believes in the domino effect, the premise that one action triggers another, then I am deeply indebted to her. If she had never made me stand up to Teresa, I would have existed on the outskirts of fifth-grade society, always defenseless. I would have never gained Mary Lou's respect or become her friend. I wouldn't have gone home with her that night at the slumber party. Instead, I would have suffered through my worst imaginings. And if it weren't for Mary Lou, I might not have had the opportunity or courage to accept Teresa's invitation to the big library on Tuesdays, which fueled my affection for books in a dramatic way. After all, I was entering the enemy's camp. It's sometimes easier to be brave if you have someone with whom you can stand beside, or who you know is always standing behind you. Being Mary Lou's friend was always comforting, even when she revealed her own vulnerability. Big, strong people have fears, as do tiny, wiry people, and it often takes more courage to reveal a weakness than to cover it up. She was confident, determined, fair-minded, and unafraid of her emotions. I was her antithesis, naive, insecure, and desperately wanting to be a part of something. Mary Lou fit in because she didn't try to be anything but herself. I wanted to be just like her.